The Townsfolk, Chapter 3, First Part. Night fell and the clouds appeared, swirling shapes borne by the wind. The light of the moon was snuffed out. This day, or to be more precise, this evening, was entirely without precedent for the town. Ordinarily, the streets would have been filled with merrymakers. Unwinding after a hard day's work, men with flushed faces would be arguing in bars where the lights burned all night, and the hum of the electric organ never faded. Women would be harping about their daily toils, while children dashed through the streets with newly acquired fireworks in hand. But tonight, shutters were lowered before the bar doors, and the wind alone danced through the streets. From time to time someone passed by, but they were volunteer deputies with deathly grim faces. The windows of every home were shut tight, and men ranged with weapons and sharpened stakes. For what was probably the first time ever, this town had to deal with the sort of rampaging demon all too familiar to those in the world below. Page break indicated by a small cross. As soon as Laura had fallen asleep, the mayor called for Dee. "Now it's up to you." And saying only this, he left. Putting the armchair they'd provided him against the wall, Dee sat down to wait. It was 11 o'clock night, one of the most common times for the nobility to pay a call. The young lady in bed breathed easily as she slept, but, though her breathing sounded serene enough, Dee heard another sound over it. Her breaths were just a bit longer and deeper than those of ordinary people. When she exhaled, her breathing sounded more like a sigh. If the noble who'd attacked the girl lived only by night, then the chances were extremely good that he wasn't aware Dee was here. No matter who was guarding the young lady, they'd certainly be no match for the power of a noble. That was exactly the sort of self-confidence that led to mistakes. And all vampire hunters found that sense of security the key to destroying the nobility. An hour passed, and then two, without anything out of the ordinary. Both Dee and the girl seemed like statues, motionless. Dee had his eyes open. At 1 o'clock morning, there was a rapping sound outside the window. Laura's eyes snapped open. An evil grin of delight rose on her lips, and a red light shone from her freshly opened eyes. As if checking just how they'd left her, she looked up above her, then to either side. When her eyes found Dee, they stopped dead. "Damned interloper," they seemed to say. Those who'd known the rapture in their blood didn't flee from it. Rather, they were doomed to drown in it. Regardless of what she made of the vampire hunter sitting there with his eyes closed, after watching him for a while, Laura turned her gaze beyond the window. "Who's there?" she asked coyly. She put the question to the pitch-black space. Faint laughter came from the darkness. A voice that only the closest of human ears would hear said, "I'm coming in." "You can't," she whispered back. "There's a hunter in here." "I don't have to fear the likes of him. Not even your father can touch me now." "But he's not like other people," Laura said softly. "There's something different about him." "Don't be ridiculous." Something that looked like a black stain started flowing in through the window while the girl watched. Before Laura's very eyes it gathered on the floor, took human shape, and became an actual person of flesh and blood. This vampire was gifted with one of the powers of legend, that of entering rooms as a fog. The sight of him there, in an orange t-shirt and wrinkled jeans, would have made the bulk of the nobility grimace. Still young, he was a powerfully built man, yet his whole body was subtly distorted, looking like a human figure molded by the hands of a child. Looking first at Laura, the vampire shifted his gaze to Dee. Sleeping, perhaps, Dee kept his face down and didn't move at all. The vampire's eyes began to glitter wildly. Red light tinged Dee's form a crimson hue. Soon, the light faded again. "That'll keep him asleep," the intruder said, "just as it did with the others. He won't even remember me." "Oh, please hurry. Come to me." Laura writhed beneath the blankets. "I want your kiss. I need—" "I know." The vampire's lips twisted into a grin. Though his teeth were dirty and crooked, his canines were particularly impressive. They slanted forward. When he slowly bent over the girl, whose eyes were shut in rapture, the air in the room grew unspeakably cold, and the chill emanated from one point in particular. The intruder looked over his shoulder in disbelief. "You dirty bastard," he growled. "You mean to tell me my gaze didn't work on you?" Dee got to his feet without saying a word. Just as he was about to launch himself at the hunter, the intruder stiffened. His already pale face lost even more color. Dee's aura had just hit him. "If I move, I'm as good as dead," he thought. "Any more of your kind around? Before you answer that, you'd better tell me your name," Dee commanded him softly. Calm as his voice was, it had a ring of steel to it that said no resistance would be tolerated. "Answer me. What's your name? Are you the only one?" "No, I'm not," the intruder replied. "How many others are there?" "One." "What's your name? And what's theirs?" The intruder began to tremble. Every inch of him shook, as if he were struggling against the threat that ensnared him. "You don't have to tell me," Dee said. "If I check you against the resident lists, I should find out who you are. Step outside." The man nodded. Slowly he made his way to the door to the front hall. Dee followed behind him. Something caught lightly at the hunter's coat. Laura's pale hand. Most likely the action was merely a reflex, and not some effort to save the intruder. However, Dee's attention was diverted for a split second, and the spell he had over the other man broke. The intruder's body lost its shape. Wasting no time, the fog rushed for the door's keyhole like a black cloud and poured through it in a single stream. Dee's right hand went into action. The flash as bright as the moon arced over his right shoulder, and the intruder who was supposedly safely on the other side of the door gave a scream of agonizing death. Dee's expression actually changed. Quickly opening the door, he peered beyond it, into the mayor's living room. Before him was the intruder, now leaning backward. A sharp wooden tip poked from the left side of his back. From the waist down, the man remained in his fog-like condition. With a deep groan, the intruder fell to the floor, both hands clutching his own throat. It seemed that the fog was probably his true form after all. His fallen body soon covered itself in a black hue and curled up on the floor with a rustling sound. "What do you think you're doing?" Dee's quiet tone harbored an unearthly air. "Nothing. I was just—" Dr. Tsurugi stammered, shaking his head. "I heard a strange sound and I froze in my tracks, trying to figure out what I should do, when all of a sudden my eyes met his, and then I just panicked and ran through him. Ran him through." Not saying a word, Dee merely gazed at bits of fog spreading across the floor, and the stake, dripping with black blood. "How did you get in here?" the hunter finally asked. His voice was far more terrifying than any heated tone could have been. "I snuck in," said Dr. Tsurugi, giving the sack over his shoulder a pat. There was a loud clatter that suggested it contained a hammer and stakes. "But everything's taken care of now, right?" "It seems we face two foes." Heedless of the changes those words wrought on the physician's expression, the hunter continued. "One may be gone now, but we don't know the whereabouts of the other. Are you sure there haven't been any other victims? None at all?" Dr. Tsurugi nodded. "The girl's probably back to normal," said Dee. "Go check on her." "Sure," the young physician replied, and he was just about to nod his head. Then, his eyes halted at the legs of the corpse that had been reduced to dust. There was a gap a fraction of an inch just below the knees. "It almost looks like you cut him, didn't you?" Giving no reply, Dee squatted down by the dusty remains. Once he was sure Dr. Tsurugi had gone through the door, the hunter stretched his left hand over the dust. "How about it?" he asked. This is a tough one," a hoarse voice said in reply. "The memory's been completely erased from the cells. But then, I guess you already know this guy wasn't made to serve any noble." Was the voice suggesting, then, that this vampire had just spontaneously generated? Not surprised in the least, Dee nodded. "But those who aren't nobility don't just turn into nobles on their own."
Then that means someone had to make him that way,"
the voice suggested.
"What we've got here is an imitation vampire. The question is, who made it?"
Dee didn't reply.
Come to think of it, they did say something about letting someone into town 2 centuries ago. Could be him again,"
the hoarse voice mused.
"Still, it's all very strange. From what the mayor said, and from the way the locals have been acting, it doesn't seem like there's been a ruckus over vampires before. So, these characters suddenly show up 200 years after the fact? There's no way their strange visitor could still be in town after all this time. What do you think?"
Straightening up, Dee headed for the mayor's room. "There's another one out there," he said. "That's all I know." When the hunter knocked on his door, the mayor stuck his head out like he'd been waiting for him to come. "What is it?" he asked. "He's been taken care of. My daughter's being saved. Ask the doctor about that." Just as the mayor's dazed face turned toward his daughter's bedroom, Dr. Tsurugi appeared. Seeing the mayor, he gave a satisfied smile. The mayor's shoulders dropped, and a deep sigh escaped from him. "Can I see her?" Not saying a word, Dee stepped aside. The mayor disappeared into his daughter's bedroom. Remarkable, isn't it? As Dee was headed for the front door, the odd remark followed him. It was neither praising nor sarcastic, but the tone of it was nearly a challenge. This thing had everyone quaking in their boots, but you come here and things get taken care of in no time flat. Although, it was yours truly that put the fitful stake through his heart. Yes, it was. Dee turned around. A strangely firm resolve, or something like it, graced the young physician's face. It was an unusual emotion, one no one had ever directed toward Dee. The mayor quickly came back out of his daughter's room. A smile spread across his face, and he declared, "The wounds on her throat have vanished, and she's sleeping peacefully. And all thanks to you, Dee. If you'll pardon me saying so, I was actually the one who finished him off." Looking dumbfounded, the mayor turned from Dee to Dr. Tsurugi and back again. The doctor's right. Dee told him. I was no use at all. Don't be ridiculous. Dr. Tsurugi countered vehemently. Mayor, this gentleman not only prevented the sneaking vampire from laying a finger on your daughter, but also succeeded in driving him from her room. I merely happened to be in the right place at the right time. If any reward is to be paid, we'll split it. You're welcome to it, Dee said, sounding somewhat surprised. His tone was strangely agreeable. Perhaps he was taken aback by events. I'd like you to come to my room, the mayor said with a smile. You'll be given your remuneration. We'll put you up wherever you like in town. Why, if you should decide to stay on permanently with us, that'd be fine, too. Can't do that just yet. In the present mood of jubilant confidence, the hunter's words hung like icicles. There's still another one out there. What? The mayor began to say, but his mouth merely hung open. Impossible. No. He said there were two of them. I don't think he was lying. But, the mayor sputtered, you see, up till now there haven't been any victims aside from my Laura. Dee turned to the physician. Gathering the drift of his question from that look alone, the physician shook his head. No one's come to my hospital secretly for treatment. When was the town's last regular medical exam? A week ago. There were some colds and minor chronic conditions, but there wasn't anyone out of the ordinary. No one skipped the medical exams. I can guarantee that. The last time his daughter was attacked was 3 days ago. How about since then? I can't vote for anyone after that. Letting out a deep sigh, the mayor brought his fist to his forehead. A fine mess we have here. One problem solved, and another one arises to take its place. Now we here are a town our foes in the outside world can't even get into, has been invaded by not one but two filthy freaks. Only two if we're lucky, Dr. Tsurugi said, his expression greatly changed. You just happened to find out about your daughter, but there may well be other victims who have been bitten without anyone noticing. They might not yet have turned into vampires. In some cases, their families may keep them hidden, too. Exactly, Dee said with a nod. While humans feared the nobility to their very marrow, the love they felt for their own flesh and blood sometimes prevailed over the terror when a member of their family became one of the undead. Many were the families who'd watched their child growing thinner and paler each night, and think it better to hide them in some back room of the house, rather than have them run out of the village. And that was usually the case when a whole family became dark disciples of the vampires. Love thinks little of courting death. When the fangs of the very child they'd risked their life to defend coldly pressed against their carotid artery, was it a feeling of remorse that skimmed through the mother or father's heart? Or was it satisfaction? I suppose it would be for the best if we didn't inform anyone that one vampire is being destroyed, said the mayor. Both Dee and Dr. Tsurugi nodded. This may sound a bit odd, the physician began, but you'll have to keep Laura from leaving the house. We want folks in town to believe this incident hasn't been resolved, because in fact it hasn't been. Mr. D and I can handle the search. Dee donned an unusual expression. The man in the white lab coat seemed intent on running the show. The problem was, he really didn't look like the pushy type. It was almost as if Dee's presence brought it out in him. Actually, the mayor began, craning his neck uncomfortably. That's a job for the Law Enforcement Bureau. I'll have to let them know about this. As I haven't been able to accomplish anything to date, Dee replied, I don't imagine they'll be of much more use in the future. Leave everything to me. And talk some sense into the good doctor, too. Understood. Dr. Tsurugi, I'd like you to remain silent regarding this incident and keep out of the investigation. Those are my orders as mayor. But... Dr. Tsurugi began indignantly before restraining himself. Very well, sir. As disappointing as it may be, I'll refrain from joining Mr. D in his work. And now, if you'll excuse me. Bidding them adieu in a loud voice, the young physician squared his sturdy shoulders and disappeared into the darkness outside. Another one, the mayor mumbled, sounding very wary. Another one. And we have to wait until he claims another victim, Dee muttered. The doctor must have seen the vampire's face. He didn't say anything in particular about it, though. You mean as to whether or not it was someone from town? Ignoring the question, Dee said, When's the last time you had a death or a missing person? Squinting, the mayor replied, Last death would be 2 years ago. Missing person would go 3 or 4 months back. Exact cause isn't known, but most likely they got drunk and fell off the town. I'll make you a list of names and addresses. Dee nodded. Page break indicated by a small cross. First part, end.